MI6, MI5, Mossad have got everything anyway through the back door. You know, if they did wipe out Hamas, there would just be a Hamas too. I think Corbyn should have used Donald Trump's powers for good instead of evil, basically. I'm sorry. Sorry, we haven't stopped this.
Have you ever been raided by the police simply for doing your job? Well, our guest today definitely has. British journalist Asa Winstanley was raided by the police on the morning of the 17th of October 2024, where his devices were confiscated. Since then, he's been subject to criminal investigations. To discuss the raid, as well as Asa's expansive body of work, and much more, I'm joined today by the man himself, British journalist Asa Winstanley. Please enjoy. Asa, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
Congratulations first on the court ruling. What would you say your feelings are? I mean, it's been a couple, maybe just over a week now since the court ruling. How do you feel?
Well, relief, first of all. I mean, it's, you know, when you're involved in some sort of legal case and you're having to deal with lawyers all the time, you know, with the best legal team in the world, which, you know, I think I did have in a lot of ways, it's very, it can be quite exhausting. It takes up more of your time than you think, and it's very all-encompassing. Like, it takes a lot of mental power, basically, and it takes away from time that I should have spent writing. So it's a relief that a big part of it is out of the way, but there's still, they haven't dropped the criminal aspect of it. So, you know, they're still saying there's an active criminal investigation. So we're calling, and I have called on them to drop that. And so that's kind of the next stage of where we're at. But for now, it's a great victory and it's a big relief.
Amazing. I want to get back onto that later, but first I want to touch on the kind of latest from Gaza, where 600 days and some change into the genocide, and we have recently the Madeleine vessel attempted to break the siege on Gaza. They were intercepted in international waters, and they've been deported. What are your thoughts on the most recent updates from Gaza and what happened with the Madeleine?
Well, if I start with the Madeleine, I think, you know, these activists were very brave in what they tried to do, you know, breaking the siege. And they're building on quite a long history. You know, we all remember the Mavi Marmara incident in, I believe it was 2010, right?
2010, yeah. May 2010.
Yeah, when there was, it really was a flotilla. There was, you know, several boats that tried to sail to Gaza, and they killed 9, fatally wounded 1 more, who later passed away. Out of the activists, they boarded them, you know. So it was very, you know, it was very brave what these activists did on the Madeleine, and you know, they didn't succeed in breaking the siege, but you know, imagine. I mean, I've seen a lot of people saying online, imagine 1,000 boats. In fact, imagine 1,000 Madeleines. Like, could they really stop them all? Doubt it. So, you know, didn't work, but I think, you know, none of us know how to stop a genocide. Like, everything we've been trying, you know, for 20 months now, and nothing's worked so far. But I think we just have to keep trying in all different ways we can. In terms of Gaza itself, yeah, I mean, what's left to say? It's difficult as a journalist, you know, as someone who deals in words, either writing or speaking them. The words really end up feeling really useless, you know, because you know, it's 20 months of the Holocaust of our times, basically. I mean, what more is there to say? Like, people are just being killed, just being annihilated every day, and it's hard to even keep up with the news, really, just psychologically and mentally. So even just following it is bad enough. So going through this genocide, it actually happening in Gaza, is just unimaginable, really. And you know, we all just want it to end.
Yeah. I think it was Chris Hedges who wrote recently a piece. I think he released it on Twitter, and he seems to believe that he thinks the Israelis are ramping up for the final stage.
I saw that one. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, to take the more optimistic side, I think that Israel can't keep this up. Like there was a really interesting article in Hebrew last week, I believe it was, or maybe about 10 days ago, that was published in Ynet, the website of the Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot, and it was by their military correspondent Yoav Zitun, and what he said in posting it in Hebrew on Twitter X was the Israeli military is running out of fighters, literally running out of fighters. That's the way he put it. I don't understand Hebrew, but obviously nowadays there's machine translations. It's very easy to translate what Israelis regard as sort of their secret language. And they just sort of think, it's interesting the things that they say when they think there's no one watching kind of thing. They tend to be a bit more frank. So what he said was the Israeli military is running out of fighters, literally running out of fighters, and so they're having to hire what he called civilian contractors to operate their bulldozers. So I mean,
Wow.
he's calling them civilian, but these are military bulldozers, being used to demolish homes and whatnot. And he said that 3 of them have been killed so far. I'm sure the true number's far higher than that. But obviously, he's a pro-Israeli journalist, pro-military journalist. But his criticism was just that the Israeli military had not recognized these civilian contractors as combat deaths. And so the fact that Israel is relying on mercenaries, starting to rely on mercenaries essentially, is a sign that the Israeli military is beginning to feel the strain in terms of their foot soldiers. So the ground troops, all these reservists that have been called up to duty, many of them are not returning. They're not actually returning to fight in Gaza because there's an epidemic of mental health crisis amongst the Israeli soldiers, which is really obscene to talk about, really, And I don't say that to engender any sympathy for, these genocidal fanatics, but it seems to be a fact at the moment that they're having a hard time getting the ground troops they need to carry on with the ground offensives. Now, they don't have any problem killing civilians. That's absolutely not the case. They can bomb civilians from the air, for an indeterminate amount of time. And
As long as they keep getting bombs from America.
Exactly. As long as they keep getting the military aid and military supplies from the US and Europe to a lesser extent. But in terms of the actual ground war against the Palestinian resistance fighters, it's not going well for them. 20 months on, and when this genocide started in October 2023, I knew it was going to be different. I knew it was going to be longer than the previous wars and more bloody. But I have to say, I didn't predict it being this long.
No one.
20 months. Yeah, no one knew. I think even the Israelis themselves are surprised that they've been allowed by the Americans to carry on for so long. But when it started, I didn't think it would go on this long, for one thing. But it's a completely different world we're living in now.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Things have changed.
I think things. No one could have predicted that the Palestinian fighters would have kept carrying out operations 20 months later. That, and yet they have. Like, they're still fighting the Israeli ground troops. The fact that all along these 20 months, the Israeli political echelon has been saying that their goal, and they're still adamant that their goal is to wipe out Hamas, wipe out Palestinian fighters. And they haven't been able to do that.
No.
They haven't been able to do it. It's
Well,
reality. I mean, yes, it's true. Like, we have to say, they have killed a lot of the leaders. That's true. But the ground troops, in terms of Palestinian fighters, still keep resisting. So,
and this isn't the first time they've killed a lot of the leaders.
Exactly.
In the early 2000s, they killed Ahmed Yassin, and after him, within 2 months, I think it was Rantisi, his deputy.
Yeah, exactly. During the Second Intifada, the leadership of much of the leadership of Hamas was essentially wiped out, and now the same things happened.
Yeah, and
but there's
Hamas has come back.
Generation.
Hamas is on October the 7th, after 20 years after these assassinations that should have supposedly crippled the movement. Then the Qassam brigades went from being what was essentially a ragtag group of people doing out missions, whatever they were doing, to almost a standing army.
Exactly.
And so, what are they expecting now for them? Well, they've killed all the leaders, and they're expecting things to. Well, they've had the experience before.
Yeah.
So you really question their motives. But I think what the Israelis, for all their faults, obviously there are many, I don't think they're stupid. Mm-hmm. I think that when they say they want to eradicate Hamas, they do want to do that, and they are aiming to do it. And they know the only way to do it is to eradicate the Palestinians. Because regardless of what you think about Hamas and their positions and their tactics, the resistance within the Palestinian society cannot be eradicated as long as Palestinians exist, because they are still being oppressed.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen Palestinians make the point many times, actually, that if they did wipe out Hamas, there would just be a Hamas too, and that's what Hamas is. Hamas is PLO too. After there was all form. You look at history, you look at the Palestinian history, and its relation to Zionism, the settler colonial force which took over their country. The whole history of that dialectic is very simply just resistance, Palestinian resistance to being eradicated. So in whatever form it takes over different periods of history, it just keeps evolving and changing. So, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was the Palestine Liberation Organization, and that was ultimately defeated partly through similar military tactics that the Israelis are using now, and partly through co-optation, where the PLO was transformed into the Palestinian Authority, which is, it's basically an adjunct of the Israeli occupation. It's essentially a contractor for the Israeli occupation in the West Bank.
But some say that the Palestinian Liberation Organization was initially created to undermine Palestinian resistance anyway, because it came from outside, right? It came from the Arab states.
You mean the PLO. Some people do have that analysis, yeah.
Then eventually the Palestinian resistance at the time, Fatah took over the PLO and then it came up to the becoming the PA, as you were saying.
Right, yeah, and so there was once the PLO was sort of neutralized, that was basically the era where Hamas was born. And so if Hamas is wiped out, there'll be something else. So, and I don't think we're anywhere near to that point anyway. I mean, I think that Hamas will there will be a new Hamas in terms of the most likely. I think the most likely outcome at the moment is that there will be Hamas will transform rather than it being succeeded. But I don't know. We remain. It remains to be seen. But I mean, I think the essential point is that as long as the oppression, Israel's oppression, continues, as long as occupation continues, as long as all forms of this genocide continue, as long as Zionism continues, there'll be resistance to it in one form or another.
The interesting thing I believe about Hamas is not out there to revolutionize the world, right? It's not out there to end empire. That's not the aim. The aim is, as they stated in 2017 when they released the updated charter, is the liberation of Palestine, and they're willing to go for a long-term truce even.
It's a national liberation movement. Yeah, you're right. It's not a global. I mean, it's anti-imperialist in the sense of it's against a kind of local expression of empire. I guess you could say that. But yeah, Hamas has always had the position, unlike other Palestinian resistance groups, like certainly the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine had more of a. They certainly had its phase of what they called external operations. Hamas has never had those sort of external operations. It's only ever carried out armed actions inside historic Palestine, and so that's just a little bit different to Popular Front in a way, and even Fatah. But yeah, it has. It's a national liberation movement. It has, and its leaders have explicitly compared Hamas to the IRA, for example, in terms of wanting to liberate their country from a foreign occupation. So yes, of course, it's got a Islamic characteristic because that's the local culture. So that's not the primary driving force in terms of liberating the land.
Yeah, and it's like they always attempt to reach out in some way to the other side, even before October 7th. Sinwar was, for example, sending notes to Netanyahu, apparently, right? And, well, maybe that was a whole ruse, but today they've compromised, or not compromised, but they've accepted many of the American and the Israeli points in order to achieve a ceasefire.
Yeah.
Such as letting go of power, right? Releasing all the captives, right?
Yeah.
And in return, all they want is a long-term ceasefire. That's all they want. And
yeah, and actually, the long-term ceasefire has been the concept of a long-term ceasefire or a hudna has been something that Hamas's political wing has offered for many, many years. And now all they're asking really is for that proposal is still on the table, but the immediate proposal is simply to end the genocide, to stop killing people in Gaza. And so, I think once the pressure on the Israeli military becomes too much to bear, and that does end, then we'll see what the political reality in Gaza becomes. As you said, like Hamas has repeatedly said in the context of this particular genocide that they do not want to rule Gaza. They don't want to be the government. They don't want to be the government. They never really wanted to be the government because Hamas in the beginning completely opposed the Palestinian Authority. It boycotted the elections in the West Bank and Gaza initially, and then they modified their strategy in 2005, and they became the government of the Palestinian Authority in 2006, and in elections that were recognized globally as free and fair. And then there was a coup against them by the US-backed local forces, which succeeded in the West Bank, but it failed in the Gaza Strip. And so they, but you know, so they ended up in government in Gaza, but they never really really wanted it. What they wanted really was to resist Israel, to liberate Palestine from Israeli occupation. That's it. That is the whole goal of Hamas as a movement. And so they've said, in the course of these negotiations with the Americans and the Israelis, we don't want to rule Gaza. We want to step down. And actually, in the latest round of those, these seemingly interminable negotiations for prisoner exchange and to release the Israeli prisoners in exchange for Palestinian prisoners and for an end to the genocide in Gaza. According to reports on Dropsite News, the Israelis had actually taken out from the draft, from the proposed ceasefire, the stipulation that said that Hamas would step down from the government in Gaza after the ceasefire. And Hamas responded with a counter-proposal adding, various things, including ending the war, an actual ceasefire, which ceases fire. But one of the other things that they added back into it was that they would step down. So it's almost as if the Israelis want them to be in government, and they don't really want to be.
Yeah, the Israelis don't want the genocide to end. I think is the bottom line. And these latest rounds of negotiations, I think, are such clear evidence of that, because Hamas are giving them not only are they giving them an off ramp and saying, okay, let's do a long-term truce and we'll give back everyone, etc., and we'll end, but they're also giving them an into Gaza. Like they're giving the space for the Israelis to find a way to infiltrate Gaza, right? They've made some major concessions here, but the Israelis are not accepting that at all. They would prefer to wipe out the Palestinians entirely.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. What you said before is exactly right. Like they do want to wipe out Hamas, but Hamas isn't the primary target. Hamas is only the target because the primary target is, like, as you said, is the Palestinian people, is to eradicate them in one way or another, whether it's killing them physically or driving them out physically, either way. But they only want to wipe out Hamas because Hamas is standing in the way of that. That's simply it. I mean, I think this genocide would have been completed by now if there wasn't any resistance. That they would have managed to expel or kill all the Palestinians from Gaza, but because there is physical armed resistance to them, they've been unable to do that.
Yeah, I wonder what their strategy is if they move the Palestinians to Egypt, because if you move all the Palestinians to Egypt, then a certain number of those Palestinians would want to go back, and they will attempt to resist. And Sinai is a lot more difficult to patrol than Gaza, right? It's got unfettered access to the Red Sea. God knows what kind of weaponry they can get in. How are they expecting this to, in the long term, produce any positive results for them? It boggles the mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think the answer is they don't know. They don't have a specific plan. They have a general goal, which is to get rid of the Palestinian people, but they don't have a specific plan. Like, they are really they're really reacting to events, because the October 7th military offensive led by Hamas really caught everybody off guard, and so the Israelis are still really responding to that in a sense, although ultimately, of course, the offensive itself was really the response, because when Israelis or the Israel lobby say that, like, oh, it started on this, we have to remember this war started on October 7th. Well, no, it really, that was only the latest military offensive in a decades-long situation, really, a war against the Palestinian people that has been waged for decades. it didn't even start in 1948. You know, in 1948, we could go back to 1948 when the Zionist militias expelled 800,000 Palestinians from their homeland. But actually, the seeds of that were planted decades earlier, and it really goes back to the start of the Zionist movement in the late 19th century.
Yeah, I would say 1897, the Zionists declared war on Palestine and Palestinians.
Formally, yeah.
Although I think they started attempting to move in earlier than that as well.
But you're right. That was the formal declaration of the Zionist Congress. Yeah.
I'd like to move on to your start in activism for Palestine. 2004, you went to Palestine with ISM, the International Solidarity Movement. But before that, what kind of brought you to Palestine? Was it like your politics before that informed you about Palestine, or did you come into awareness about what was going on in Palestine and that informed how your politics were moving forward?
A bit of both. I was brought up in quite a religious Christian family, and I was brought up as a pacifist, and so I joined the anti-war movement in 2001 after 9/11. When the invasion of Afghanistan started, I started going to anti-war protests. And then, of course, that continued when they were preparing to invade Iraq. And in all of those protests in London, there would always be Palestinian flags. Because, of course, that was during the Second Intifada. The Second Intifada was happening. And, you know, I was quite young then. I was in my early 20s. And I didn't really understand. I didn't understand the Palestinian cause or the situation. All I knew was really vague stuff from headlines in the news about something violent was going on and all this. It was a kind of typically naive British understanding, I would say, of like, well, there's two sides fighting each other and there's kind of wrong on both sides kind of thing. And so, and of course, you have all these place names and stuff in the Christian Bible and whatnot. So there's that sort of vague background. But when I was on these protests and I saw these flags, it was sort of like, well, why are they sort of supporting one side? And so I was genuinely like curious to find out more. So I just started educating myself. Basically, I started reading news, started reading. Of course, that was the very early stages of the internet and alternative media and independent media. Started reading a lot of that. Started reading a lot of books, and just lots of critical stuff about the history. And started going to activist groups, just to their events, just to learn about their take. And I learned a pro-Israeli take as well. And it was just a case of learning about Palestine, the reality of Palestine. And once I learned the basic fact of, well, I remember actually an uncle of mine actually told me, well, in 1948, when Israel was, he said, Israel hasn't existed like for thousands of years as they claim. It's just it was founded in 1948, and the Palestinians were basically kicked out. And I thought, wow, that's like, I can't believe that's true, because people are always saying it's complicated. I can't believe it's that simple. And so I started reading more about it, and I read some of the Israeli so-called new historians, people like Ilan Pappé and Nurma Salha, who's actually a Palestinian, but Palestinian with Israeli citizenship. So he has access to the Israeli archives in Hebrew. He understands it all. And yeah, that it is that simple, basically. I mean, by now I've got 20 years of journalistic experience in this field, and I feel eminently qualified to say it's not complicated. You don't need to have 20 years of journalistic experience to know it's pretty simple. Like, it is that simple. The Palestinians were kicked out by this settler colonial entity. It is pretty much that simple. I mean, of course, history can be complicated, and there is things that are complicated, and so on and so forth. But when you get down to the brass tacks, that's what it is. That's why there is such resistance to Israel, and why Israel is so reviled around the world. Now, as all polling shows, in pretty much every country, more people are sympathetic with the Palestinians than the Israelis. The latest Pew polling just came out about that last week, and that is what it is. And so that's how I started learning about it. Really, was from the anti-war movement, because there was insistence by it has to be said Muslim groups to add that slogan of, because it was "Don't attack Iraq, free Palestine." And they added that slogan was added as well. So, I mean, that played a major part in sort of awakening my consciousness.
Is there one thing in particular that you saw or you witnessed, etc., that made you feel, okay, I need to dedicate my life to this?
That's a good question. When you start going to Palestine gets under your skin, has a way of staying with you. I mean, I think, you mentioned ISM, the activist group that I was part of, and back then they had a London branch, and that was one of the ways I started getting educated, and I got training from them, and I got involved with them, and we went out. I went out with them to Palestine. And that's how I started living in the West Bank. I remember it as, around about 2001, 2002, just seeing like news. I don't know, it was probably Channel 4 News or maybe the BBC, I don't know. And seeing some of those kind of volunteers, I don't know if they were explicitly ISM, but either ISM or a group like them. And I can still see it now. I can still see the news report of these, these white activists in... It was probably, I can't say for sure where it was. It was probably Bethlehem or maybe Ramallah or somewhere like that during the Second Intifada, and they're saying, don't shoot, and the Israelis are just shooting at them, just shooting and just blatantly shooting at them. I remember thinking, well, if they're doing that to white people who are, with cameras there in front of the whole headlines of the news media, how much more violent are they actually being to Palestinians? And it is that blatant, and it is that oppressive. That was one thing, and of course, Rachel Corrie was killed in Gaza, and the ISM activist by the Israelis, and Tom Herndl, and that was another shocking thing. And then once you start going out to Palestine, it changes your life. It does. Everyone who goes out there and sees the West Bank, everyone talks about Hebron as well, and just how stark the sort of apartheid regime is there, where there's literal roads that Palestinians are banned from walking down, and the sort of petty apartheid in that way. It's just such a stark injustice. You can't help but be changed by it. And also, not just the negative side, the spirit of resistance of the Palestinian people. Like they just refusing to be defeated, staying on their land, no matter the suffering that they go through, and just continuing to resist, and just insisting on, the word martyr gets sort of demonized by Israelis, and by the pro-Israel lobby, that it's like, it means a suicide bomber or something like that. They're just killing Jews and all this kind of nonsense. But actually, the political culture among Palestinians is to say that the way martyr gets used actually is essentially anyone who was killed by the Israelis I mean, people have different definitions of it. Some people insist that it's only people who were killed in the course of resisting Israel in some way, and others will say that, well, anyone who's been killed by the Israelis is a martyr. But the point
Because existence is resistance. Just existing on that land.
Yeah, absolutely. You're like staying on your land under these conditions is very, very difficult. It is absolutely a form of resistance. And so, this the culture of venerating martyrs and honoring the sacrifices that people have made for the struggle, it's really an admirable thing, because it's completely contrary to the way that it's sort of demonized. That is demonized in the West sometimes. It's a resistance culture that is really inspiring, because it's not about a sort of a cult of personality. It's about just making whatever contribution you can to this struggle for liberation during your time, and while at the same time facing the stark reality that many of us may not even live to see the liberation, but still carrying out whatever contribution you can make to that struggle. Yeah. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, the Zionists, they would say that the veneration of the martyrs is indicative of some sort of death cult, but really it's the opposite. It's the acknowledgement of the sacrifices made and an optimism that these sacrifices will lead to a better future for those that remain.
Absolutely. That's what it is. Yeah. It's about life, not death.
Is there anything you look back on in your time in Palestine, like you look back on with fondness? Anything in particular?
Yeah, all of it. I mean, I saw some terrible things, but yeah, and it's. I mean, I don't want to glorify it too much, because it's. I did see some very horrible things, and the conditions people live under are very bad, but a lot of the time. But Palestine is a beautiful country, and it is you can see what it would be like without the oppression, without the military occupation, and without having this invading force dictating every aspect of people's lives.
Have you been back after your early days there?
So I haven't been for a decade now.
Do you think you're allowed back in, or?
I doubt it.
I'm definitely not allowed back in. I'll probably have to wait till liberation if it happens in my lifetime.
Yeah.
But who knows? Obviously, after you went to Palestine, you started your journalism journey. You joined Electronic Intifada, and then you wrote a book, Weaponizing Antisemitism, about the events that transpired with the so-called People's Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn. I've had some, let's say, frustrations with Jeremy. I was young at the time. This is, I think, it's the first time I could vote is 2017, I think it was. That's the first general election I was able to vote. And obviously with a whole bunch of young people kind of being very optimistic, and Jeremy Corbyn seemed to be the guy to take us to a brighter future. But at the time, it was also Trump's tenure as president the first time. And I would kind of compare and contrast the two. Is there would be a lot of accusations, pelted either way, right? Whether it's by the US media against Trump or UK media against Jeremy Corbyn. And obviously you had the antisemitism against Jeremy Corbyn. Anytime that Trump was accused of something, even if it was true, he'd say fake news, right? Yeah. And he'd get away with it, right? And in my head, obviously maybe because I was young, I didn't know how things worked here in the country. Maybe things in the UK work differently. In my head, I'm thinking, they're lying about you, Jeremy. Why aren't you just labeling it fake news and moving on?
Yeah.
Is that something you think like that he could have done, or is that a frustration you've seen with many people?
Yeah, I don't think you were naive. I think you were completely right. I mean, I think he should have said that. I mean, I think Corbyn should have used Donald Trump's powers for good instead of evil, basically. Like, I mean, yeah, just like you said, just double down, because actually, unlike Trump, you're right most of the time. So just tell them fake news. Like, in terms of the anti-Semitic, and because it was fake news, it actually was fake news. This is the thing, but unfortunately, he didn't do that. Like, so he was accused of either being anti-Semitic or that the people around him were anti-Semitic, and he wasn't doing enough about it, something like that. And so he should have, and unfortunately his response to that was to just condemn anti-Semitism. Now, what's wrong with condemning anti-Semitism? Okay, fine. The problem is, if you condemn anti-Semitism where there is no anti-Semitism, you're giving the impression there was anti-Semitism in the first place, if you see what I mean. So he was, unfortunately, by doing that, was indirectly contributing to the smears against people who were actually just supporting Palestinians, So it like with Ken Livingstone, for example. So, what he could have done instead was say, well, of course we condemn anti-Semitism, but actually what you're doing here is just attacking me or the people around me because we're supporting Palestinians, and this is just a smear against us, and it is fake news. And he should have done that. And he had that sort of strategy for other topics sometimes, and it was, when he did that, it was very successful. Like, so there was, I mentioned the example in my book of during the election in 2017. If you remember, the Manchester bombing happened during the election campaign. Coincidence? Maybe not, but that's a topic for another time. But the Manchester bombing happened, and a lot of people around Corbyn thought that he should just come out and just condemn the bombing and say, and say, oh, we have to do more about. We have to crack down on this kind of Islamic terror. The typical kind of politicians' response, conservative Labour politicians' response. There was people around him who were saying that he should have that kind of security response to it. And he didn't. He came out and he said, it's terrible, obviously it's a terrible bombing, but also if we have an anti-war policy, then things like this are less likely to happen. And he did do that, and so basically he doubled down. He doubled down on his anti-war take that he's always had, and that was perceived at the time as suicidal by mainstream media, but it worked. It completely worked for him. It was very popular. It was a sensible approach, and it helped him in the polls. So, he should have had the same approach to this so-called anti-Semitism. And he didn't, unfortunately. And I have to say, if he did do that, there's no guarantee it would have worked, because it was a very, very, very powerful fabrication. Like, it was a very strong and it turns out quite successful sabotage campaign. So we can't say for sure that it would have worked, but it was the only thing that could have possibly worked, because there was, and in any way, it was like it was actually the only morally and politically correct thing to do. So he should have done that, and he didn't.
He ended up kind of, in a way, maybe inadvertently purging the party of people who actually supported him.
Yeah.
Maybe he thought these people were dealing in good faith, the people who were accusing of anti-Semitism. Maybe
I think he just didn't want to deal with it. This is the thing, because I think he did find it hurtful, like personally hurtful, to be accused of racism when he's such a strong anti-racist. But, and I can understand that, and I can understand like the pressure he was under. But it's quite easy to see in retrospect now, and I mean, I personally found it quite easy to see at the time, but he should have held firm, and he should have purged the party in the other direction. Is what he should have done. Got rid of all these pro-Israel people.
Yeah, because a lot of people came out later and they said they worked against the Labour Party or against Jeremy Corbyn winning at the time, even though they were doing so well. And arguably, he may have been more popular here than Trump was in the US.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe. Well, who knows? In hindsight,
Yeah.
There's a question. It's something that I've noticed, looking back, is looking now and then comparing it to back then. The Israeli ambassador that we have now is, I know she's far right. Yeah. She was at some point, I think, minister of.
She's not only a settler; she's a settler leader. Like, she's been a champion of the settlers for many years. Yeah.
And she's a terrible orator, and she doesn't know how to advocate. Well, I mean, it's very difficult to advocate for Israeli genocide. Obviously,
you notice they don't put her on TV all that often.
No.
Yeah.
But before her was Mark Regev.
Yeah.
Who they did put on TV though.
Yeah.
And his tenure kind of coincided with Jeremy's tenure as leader of the Labour Party.
100%.
Do you think there's something there, or do you think it's just a coincidence?
Yeah. No, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. Whether it was specifically for Corbyn or not, I mean, I do address it in the book, and I get into some of the details of that. It was part of the same strategy of trying to divide the left. Definitely, specifically on the issue of weaponized anti-Semitism, fake anti-Semitism. It was definitely part of that strategy, because that is long been a strategy in Israeli counterinsurgency, I guess you could say, against the Western solidarity movements with Palestine. Because the thing is with Mark Regev, what a lot of people don't understand, and I mentioned this in the book, is that we tend, because Mark Regev was for many years the Netanyahu spokesperson, we think of him as being on the Zionist right. But actually, in Zionists' own political language, he's considered part of the Zionist left. Now, we don't understand that, because the Zionist left and the Zionist right are basically identical. Yeah, they're both fascist in different ways. But, his whole political tendency, it perceives itself as left-wing Zionism. And so he's familiar with all that sort of political language of the Labour Party and all that kind of stuff. And so, I think he was sent to London specifically to attack progressive movements and to get them to basically turn against themselves within, specifically on the issue of anti-Semitism. Yeah, so he was exactly in the right place at the right time in order to combat Corbynism, and it has to be said, he did a good job of it.
Yeah, unfortunately, they did succeed, but
yeah.
And now we have this soulless, as Matt Cunard described him, fella in charge, Keir Starmer, who doesn't have a single. Does he hold a single belief of his own? I don't know. I feel like he doesn't.
Yeah, I don't. I agree with that. Yeah, he's. I think he's a sort of willing servant of whatever powers are that be, basically. Yeah.
That brings me on to another question about Corbyn, which is he definitely posed some sort of threat to the establishment and the empire. And so my question is, if it wasn't anti-Semitism, would they have found something else?
That's a good question. Yes and no. I mean, they found, as it went, they did find a lot of things. Like they attacked him in a lot of different ways. They had, if you remember, there was that front page of The Sun during one of the elections. I think it must have been the 2017 election, and it was just a stupid graphic of a photo of Corbyn, and they just put him in a bin, and the headline was something like bin Corbyn or something stupid like that.
Classic Sun.
Yeah, exactly. And it was they listed, I detail it in my book, but it was something like they listed the things that they were accusing him of, being a left-wing extremist, IOA sympathizer, terrorist fan, and all this kind of stuff. But they didn't at that stage say anti-Semite, because people don't care, because people, even then, people, in terms of the general population, just knew that they're only saying that about, that's not true. It's obviously not true. He's obviously not an anti-Semite, and they're only saying that because he's involved in Palestine solidarity work. So they did have all these different things that they attacked him on, but nothing really stuck. Nothing really worked so well as the anti-Semitism fabrication. And really that only worked so well because the British left was so, in terms of the influential people, names and whatnot on the British left was so useless on the question, because there was elements of it who were, even people like John Landsman, who were at a minimum sympathetic to Zionism. I mean, at the beginning of the genocide, John Landsman just came fully out in favour, really, of the genocide. So the mask was fully off there. But for whatever reasons, whatever various historical reasons, this was the only thing that really, really worked. And it worked because of there was a large influential infiltration of Zionism within the British political left, and certainly in terms of people who were influential around Corbyn, that played a big part in his defeat.
That actually brings us to the question, kind of, what is the Labour Party? Is it actually left-wing, or is it simply, as I think I read this somewhere, where they attempt, at least when they were founded, attempt to split the spoils of British Empire more evenly amongst the citizens of the United Kingdom, as opposed to actually creating some sort of equity and equality among subjects of the empire itself.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, that what you've just said. And it's actually a very old critique of the British Labour Party specifically. Lenin himself called it Labour aristocracy, that the British working class, or elements of the British working class, actually benefited from British Empire, because we were able to have a welfare state and an NHS. I mean, this is later than Lenin, obviously, but and yet still benefiting from proceeds of empire in various different ways. Now, of course, it's American empire. So yeah, I mean, I think by now there's several layers of that in terms of the Labour Party that we have now. Like, the Labour Party doesn't even have those those benefits, even for the white or British working class. It doesn't even have those. It's completely neoliberal since 1979, when Thatcher came in. Thatcherism changed it all. Thatcher, I mentioned this in the book, but Thatcher herself said her main achievement was to change the Labour Party. And the Labour Party under Tony Blair and his successors became very, very pro-free markets, anti-welfare state, anti-nationalisation. They privatised everything they could get their hands on. They didn't manage to privatise the NHS, but now the Labour government and previous governments are sort of doing it by the back door in increments, privatising off parts of it. And so, they have, and they have the war, like, they have the pro-war platform, but they don't even have the beneficial side of that for the Labour aristocracy doesn't really exist, because what aristocracy is there? Not what is the British working class getting?
I mean, the empire's gone, I guess. So.
Yeah, well, there is that. Yeah.
This indicates what seems to be a major failure of party politics, which is, instead of actually standing for some sort of set of beliefs and addressing the issues within society through the lens of your set of beliefs, all you're doing is attempting to get elected for the next term, and just shifting to whatever's going to get you elected, whatever's popular.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it's the Starmer's Labour apparatchiks were always talking about power, but I mean, what's the point of getting into power if your policies that you're enacting with that power are essentially, for the most part, the same as the Conservative Party. Like, what benefit is there? Another thing the Blairites were very much in favour of was Israel. You know, Tony Blair was very financially actually backed by pro-Israel lobby, as is Keir Starmer, and I think that's why Corbyn was seen as such a threat to this establishment, because he wasn't taking the pro-Israel money, and he did have very minimal. You know, he didn't see Palestinians as animals. You know, he saw Palestinians as human. You know, so yeah, he was seen as a threat, and consequently, he had to be removed, and he was.
Was he ever labelled anti-Afrikaner when he was campaigning against apartheid?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. He may have been, but you raised a good point, because there's a lot of similarities between Israel and apartheid South Africa, but it's a similarity and it's a difference, right? Because there actually was a pro apartheid lobby in the West that did exist, and it was quite successful for a period, but it wasn't as the concept of anti-Afrikaner racism. I don't think it really existed, as far as I know, and if it did, it certainly wasn't successful to the extent that the anti-Semitism fabrication has been. And yeah, it's a ridiculous concept, really, when they say, when people like Piers Morgan say, oh well, Hamas only just wants to kill Jews. If you think about it logically, it's completely nonsensical, because what he's saying there is, if, let's say, for example, Buddhists if there'd been a Buddhist supremacist movement that had invaded Palestine and had taken over their land, driven out 800,000 people, you know, launched a war of eradication against them,
and done it in the name of Buddhism and Buddhists.
And done it in the name of Buddhists. He done it in the name of the Buddhist state. He wouldn't. What are you saying, that they wouldn't have fought against them? It's nonsense. Of course they would have. It's nonsensical. Of course they would have.
And the issue is they attack the positions, or the so-called positions, but they're not the actual positions of Hamas. It's like you can attack Hamas's positions and their tactics, but actually attack their positions. Like, you're not even in the initial charter of 1988, which is like, it's a terrible charter. It's got things, you know, the
well, it was never really a charter. This is the thing. Like, it was a document written by one man, which was never actually formally adopted by the whole movement. And it was kind of superseded actually pretty quickly. But yeah, it's not a good document. But it was only formally superseded in 2017. Yeah. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, but like, just attack what's actually in the document. Don't make things up, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, attack the Elders of Zion thing. Yeah, right? That's in there. Attack that, right?
Yeah.
But don't say they want to kill. That's not in the document. There's nowhere in the document does it say they want to kill all Jews.
Yeah.
So it's just, I mean, but they're getting very sloppy. I mean, the Zionist propaganda. Actually, I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
Do you see a difference, or can you compare and contrast how Zionist propaganda is today as opposed to how it was when you first started out?
It's kind of the same but more desperate, because less and less people believe it. That's what I would say. Less and less people believe it, and it's terminal. Like, the decline in their popularity is terminal. I mean, I think I saw a tweet today which said something like, we can rebuild, Gaza can be rebuilt, but Israel's popularity is never coming back. Something along those lines. And I think I mean, I think that there's a lot in that. There's a lot in that because they, unfortunately, many people have been killed in Gaza. And the official figures are far understating it. I think the reality is probably hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in Gaza. So those people are not coming back. So that's awful and terrible. At the same time, this will end at some point, and there will be, Gaza will be rebuilt sooner or later. But it's true, like Israel's standing in the world is never going to go back to what it was. Like, it's interesting, like, you talked about the Madeleine, and I was, following very, very closely the Mavi Marmara flotilla when that was attacked, and I think I might have actually done a bit of press work for them. Anyway, the difference in how that was covered to how it's being covered now is quite substantial, I would say. Like, it was hard at that time to get anyone to pay attention to it. And, when 9-10 of them were killed, that was when it made headlines. But they were demonized, they were absolutely, and there is, the Madeleine is kind of being demonized, but not, like, it's
more trivialized, I feel.
Yeah, like it exactly. It is being sort of trivialized. And I think that, but nonetheless, people are following it. People are following it in a way that the Mavi Marmara wasn't being followed, I would say. And so, the Israel standing in the world is really in terminal decline, and I think they know that, and I think that's a large part of the reason why they don't want this war to end, the war and ceasing fire in Gaza. They don't want that to happen. They're desperate for that not to happen because there will then be consequences, in terms of the Israeli internal society. There'll be elections. There'll probably be early elections. There'll most likely be a change of government. And there will be, a terminal. There will be consequences globally for them, which they don't want to have to face.
I don't know. I feel like Netanyahu has given them enough of a supposed victory, with what supposedly decapitating Hezbollah, killing many of the leaders of Hamas, destroying Gaza. I mean, Israelis they're an insane society. I think that's enough of a victory for them to maybe re-elect him.
Yeah, I mean, you raised some very valid points. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, there's look, the Israeli society is absolutely an insane society.
And they're insufferable as well.
Yeah. Like what, 90% of them supported the genocide at the beginning of the genocide, and the polling is more or less the same now. That's not the question, but there is a kind of, but Israelis also hate each other. This is the thing, right? So like, you see a lot of these protests, these anti-Netanyahu protests. Most of these protests, except for a very, very small little minority, all these protests in Tel Aviv, they're only against Netanyahu because they want a prisoner exchange to happen. They don't care about Palestinians, or they also want them to be killed. But they also don't like Netanyahu. They think that Netanyahu is not good for Israel. So I think it's highly likely after a ceasefire there will be a change of government. But, like you said, it's possible during an election campaign that he could win the electorate over and say, look, I killed Hassan Nasrallah, killed Yahya Sinwar. It could have an effect.
Raisi as well, maybe.
Sorry?
The Iranian president as well, maybe.
Well, yeah.
I want to go back to the court ruling.
Yeah.
In your favour, you were raided on the 17th of October. It was the morning, right? Crisp, crisp London morning.
It was still dark, yeah.
And so my question is, why do you think that you and others like you, journalists who oppose genocide, because you weren't the only one, why do you think you were raided by this government?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm hoping to find out more. I think it was a way to make it harder for me to do my journalism. I think it was a way to just harass me, basically, and to try and stop me from doing my reporting. I think it's still an open question until we find out more of where did this come from? Where did the impetus come from? I mean, this is just an anecdotal impression, but I very much got the impression from the police officers themselves that it wasn't the initiative of the police so much as there was political pressure being put on them. Now, where did that... And you can tell that just from the timing as well, right? Because they told me, and the documents, some of the documents later confirmed, that this investigation against me had been ongoing at that time for a year. So from October 2023 until now.
So immediately October 23, they got in your case.
So that's what they're saying. But but why did it take a year for them to raid me then? So I think there's different pressures there. I think when the Labour government came in August 2024, July 2024, sorry, it was then only 2 months later, September 2024, when they got the warrant to raid me. So I think it's likely that there was political pressure from the Labour government, the new Labour government, to raid me. I mean, I'd obviously, with my book, made a lot of enemies in the Labour government.
Understandably.
So I think that was part of it. But then also you have to ask, like, why does the Labour Party, the Labour government, have that? And I think the Zionists, I think it is the pro-Israel lobby. I think it's quite possibly Israel itself who are putting pressure. I mean, we know Israel is doing this. Like, there was against Palestine Action, for example, the activist group. Very similar, worse raids have taken place against Palestine Action. Yeah. And we know the Israeli embassy specifically has put pressure on the British government to raid Palestine Action, specifically to crack down on them. And so it's highly likely they've done the same for me and people like me. Yeah.
And they're putting terrorist charges against you and against Palestine Action activists, those who attempt to stop bombs being built to burn babies.
I haven't actually been charged with anything yet. So I haven't actually faced any charges, and we've called for them to drop. But they've said there is still an active investigation. So they could theoretically charge me at any point, but I don't think they have the evidence to do it. This is the reality. Like, it's not, they haven't been able to charge. If they were able to charge me with anything, because they're saying it's about tweets. The tweets are public. They didn't need to raid me. There's not anything. My reporting and the tweets, I make. Twitter, by and large, is a way for me. It's a tool in my journalistic arsenal. So if they haven't been able to make anything stick in that whole year, and they still haven't until now, I don't see them being able to do it. But that, on the other hand, you don't know what they're going to do, because the raid itself was illegal, as the judge ruled. So,
but they still have access to your files and the things that the files that they copied or stole from your computer.
Well, they say that we were able to put a halt on the search that they did on my devices. They were unable. They say they haven't accessed my devices. So if they're lying about that, then anything that they would have obtained from those devices can't be used in any court because it's illegally obtained. So
do you think they'd use it maybe for kind of surveillance purposes, MI5, MI6, maybe Mossad?
MI6, MI5, Mossad have got everything anyway through the back door, I think. I mean, look, I take all the precautions. I encrypt everything, everything. I didn't give them any of my passwords. I said no comment to everything. We take all the precautions we can, but I think all these technological services are, vulnerable anyway, and that we should all bear that in mind. That like encryption is not a panacea.
Was it the UK government or the US government that sued Apple to get backdoor access? I think
the UK government, yeah, and we can't even really know about it. We're not even allowed to know about it because the newspapers are not even allowed to report about it. But the UK government, Yvette Cooper specifically, demanded that Apple give them backdoor access to their encrypted cloud service, and Apple refused, to their credit, to do it, and they withdrew the encrypted cloud service in the UK rather than give access. Whatever may be happening with that legal case that Apple's got against the UK government right now, with that, we don't know because it's happening in secret courts.
What does this mean for freedom of speech? The fact that you were raided and others like you were raided, the fact that these governments are surveilling us in these ways, what do you think the outcome of this will be?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's all a very, very terrible and concerning situation, and it speaks to the real lack of free speech in Britain, especially. I think J.D. Vance was kind of right about that, although kind of for the wrong reasons. Yeah. He didn't mention. I think he was accidentally right about that. For all the problems in the US, I mean, at least they have the First Amendment, which, at least on paper, protects free speech, and we don't have similar protections in this country. The fact that my case has been completely ignored by the mainstream media in this country. The closest we got to mainstream media was Press Gazette, which is like the specialist journalists, reporting on journalism. At least they did report it. The National is a newspaper, pro-independence newspaper in Scotland. They reported it. But none of the mainstream newspapers. And that speaks to a kind of, I don't know if it's fear or cowardice amongst those kind of journalists, because it must be very concerning to them that even a journalist like me, that even if they don't agree with me or my positions on things, freedom of speech being denied to me is a threat to any journalist in this country.
But we've seen how they've been silent on the journalists getting massacred in Gaza, over 200. Yeah. So, I mean, what can you expect from them? Yeah. I want to move on to the axis of resistance. Very contentious topic, let's say. Over the last 20 months, they've taken a bit of a battering, to put it mildly. The only front currently open in support of the resistance in Gaza is Yemen, which I'm still boggled by. I mean, my mind is still boggled about how that's still possible, considering the fact that the US keeps hitting them, the Israelis keep hitting them, and
the US has stopped now because Trump signed a ceasefire deal with them and said they can carry on hitting Israel, which is kind of astonishing, really. Yeah. But that's what happened. Yeah, they fought the US to a standstill.
It's very interesting, because as well with Yemen, it's a bit different to Lebanon or to like countries surrounding Palestine, because Yemen's not directly affected by what's going on in Gaza. Yeah, like Lebanon is directly affected by the Israelis, right? So there was an expectation for them to do anything. No one really was expecting Yemen to do much, and for them to hold out this long, it's really been quite astonishing.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
How would you evaluate where the axis is at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think similar to Hamas, when I was saying that, whatever comes out of this, there'll be a new Hamas, whether it's Hamas 2 in terms of, let's say, PLO 3, a completely new entity, or the same movement but fundamentally changed in terms of a new generation of leadership, a new generation of fighters, and perhaps a new approach to the political side of things. If Hamas survives, which it has so far, if it survives, then it will be a different group from what it was before. I think we can say similarly to the axis of resistance. I mean, and we can already see how it's. I mean, it's kind of different because obviously the axis of resistance is more of a concept and an alliance of groups rather than a specific organization like Hamas is. But it's fundamentally different. I mean, obviously, the Syrian aspect of it is completely out of the picture now. That the new rulers of Syria are anti-resistance. So that is a fundamental change to the axis of resistance because the Syrian plank is not there. But arguably, a lot of people would say that the Syrian plank of the axis of resistance was always the weakest part anyway, because it wasn't actively fighting Israel in terms of front lines fighting like Hezbollah.
It was mostly just a corridor for Iran to send weaponry to Hezbollah.
Yeah, exactly. But on the other hand, Iran is very much still in place. So Hezbollah is still there, still surviving. With a new leader, Hassan Nasrallah was obviously killed. It does seem that Hezbollah was infiltrated by the Israelis in some way or another. I mean, I think we'll have to see what comes out about that. What actually happened there. There was many military leaders and political leaders, and of course the leader of Hezbollah itself were killed, assassinated. And Lebanon in general has taken a very big beating in an Israeli annihilation campaign. There is new areas of Lebanon that have been occupied by Israel now that are still occupied by Israel. They haven't observed the ceasefire that they themselves signed with Hezbollah. They never do. Exactly. We always know Israel always violates ceasefires, as we know. But on the other side, Hezbollah still exists as a fighting force, and Israel was unable to invade Lebanon to the extent that it would have liked to have done. And as you said, Yemen is still fighting and still very much fighting Israel with conventional weapons,
Plus the occasional ballistic missile.
Yeah, yeah. So I think reports of the demise of the axis of resistance have been exaggerated. At the same time, there's no doubt it has taken there is some very, very serious setbacks that it has had, for sure, yeah.
Some people would say that the infiltration that occurred in Hezbollah is because of their involvement in Syria. A lot of kind of disgruntlement from within or without. It allowed for the infiltration.
Yeah.
Do you think that might be the case?
I've seen I've read the reports about that analysis. Yeah, it's quite possible. Certainly, I mean, when you expand any kind of covert operation, any kind of if there's any kind of underground resistance movement, which then expands out into a wider, more open movement, fighting force, and becomes more of a conventional army, then it is going to be easier to infiltrate. There is that analysis that their involvement, their intervention in Syria, on the side of the former Syrian government, made them more open to that infiltration. But I think we have to wait and see, because we don't really know. We don't. I personally, I mean, I'm not an expert in Hezbollah, but I haven't seen yet any reports that definitively show how the movement was infiltrated to enable the Israelis to find the locations of Hassan Nasrallah, for example, so that they could assassinate him. I mean, they did just, it wasn't like, when I say assassinate, it wasn't like they took him out pinpoint. They basically annihilated the whole tower block where he was underneath, where he was underneath, which is what they always do, right?
And then they say,
but they still knew that he was there.
Yeah.
So how? And they did it with lots of other military leaders. So there's no doubt that was an intelligence achievement for them, has to be said. So was the Syrian intervention part of that? It may have been, but I think we still have to wait and see how that was done.
Before
we say that definitively.
With the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, they, like you said, they blew up an entire tower block. I don't know how many hundreds. They massacred on that day.
Yeah.
And then recently, in the last few days, they start bragging about how they were able to poison Mohammed Sinwar in his supposed tunnels under the European hospital, which we know they have provided no evidence for. They still keep lying about these things. But what is it? Which is it? Can you target these individuals precisely, or do you have to blow them up? Which, like, you can't have it both ways, Yeah. But they go around, contradicting themselves as usual.
For sure.
I want to talk about the new Syrian administration. You've vocalized your, let's say, distrust for the new Syrian administration.
You could say that.
To put it mildly. Now, I've got a question about the concept that it's supposedly a US-Turkey Al-Qaeda coup, or with many people they say CIA, Mossad involvement as well. Now, why would the Israelis and the Americans, people well known for adopting the strategy of divide and rule, empower someone who is kind of the most likely as a figure to unite a post-Assad Syria, considering he's a representative of the majority of Syrians, when there are other groups, for example, the Druze, who have some particular leaders within that community, not all, have shown a proclivity to being friendly with Israel. Or, for example, ISIS, which still does exist in Syria as its own separate entity. Why would they go for this individual who has been able to kind of create a microstate in Idlib for some time and is now empowered to potentially unite Syria?
Well, I mean, I think it's a matter of responding to events, isn't it? It's what comes out. I think that it's a matter of divide and rule, like you said. Like, it's I mean, we can see the reality of what's happened, which is after I would characterize it as a kind of coup, which happened in December.
A coup in what sense? As in, they were fighting him readily, right? So, what were there? Are you saying there were interior or internal forces within the Assad regime that switched? I mean,
well,
I
I
think that's
agree
my
in the
understanding of
sense
it.
that it was armed groups which took over, which overthrew the government.
Okay.
So there was, what's happened since then, however we describe it is, a kind of dismantling of the Syrian state. I would say, certainly a dismantling of the Syrian military.
Yeah, which is a bit interesting considering a lot of people claim that they euphemistically they call him Julani, as in with a J-E-U, A-W, sorry, to signify that he works for the Israelis, and yet the Israelis keep attacking. They attacked the military sites to begin with, then they occupied more land, and then they said that we'll never allow the Syrians to have any sovereignty over this land, and then they said we're going to split up Syria.
Yeah.
Why would they do that to their supposed ally?
Because his rule is tenuous, and he could be counter overthrown at any time. And so if that happens, then the weapons have gone. Whoever, say, I don't know, I mean, we look at, I'm sure they were looking at what happened in Iraq, when there was the kind of resistance to the Americans, which wasn't successful, but the Baathists sort of teamed up with the Al-Qaeda elements, and there was this long-term debilitating resistance to them. So I'm sure they were the Americans and the Israelis and all the other outside forces involved in overthrowing the former Syrian government. We're worried about similar things happening to them, and so if Jolani's rule was tenuous, as I still think it probably is, they would have seen this as their perfect opportunity. Get rid of these weapons. Get rid of the serious weapons, the helicopters, the artillery, the anti.
Aircraft?
The anti-aircraft weaponry, all this kind of stuff, which they did. Get rid of it now, because it could be a threat to Israel in any future.
You don't think that Ahmed al-Shara himself and his people, you don't think they pose any threat to Israel?
No, because the whole history of Al-Qaeda and Daesh is they've never fought Israel. And if anything, they've been on the other side. There was actually an instance I was reminded of this the other day. This week, I was talking to a friend who asked me a similar question. Because I said there's these recent reports of Israel funding these anti-Hamas groups in Gaza, which the former Israeli defense minister has just alleged are ISIS affiliated in Gaza. Now, whether that's true or not, I think it remains to be seen. But certainly they are, these gangs looting the aid in order for a way to kind of foment problems for Hamas in Gaza. But she asked me, why would they do that? Surely it would, because I said I doubt their weapons would be turned against. The weapons of these anti-Hamas groups would ultimately be turned against Israel, because that was the criticism of the former Israeli defense minister. He's saying Netanyahu is empowering these groups, but these weapons he's giving them weapons, but their weapons are going to be turned on us. And I said on the live stream, well, I doubt that would happen. And my friend asked me, well, why would you say that? Surely this is a more extreme group. And my answer was similar to what I've just said to you. The whole history of ISIS, Daesh, and of Al-Qaeda is not to fight Israel. It's ultimately been on the same side as Israel. And if you look at, there was an instance in 2017 where ISIS fighters actually accidentally fired on an Israeli position and apologized for it. So that kind of tells you everything you need to know.
But the ISIS as an organization is separate from Al Qaeda, which is
Sure.
separate from
Yeah. But one came
HTS.
from the other.
One did come out from the other, it's true, but they are separate organizations, and ISIS and Al Qaeda both separately do still exist in Syria, separate from HTS, right?
Yeah.
So my question though is like supposedly this is in the interest of Israel, yet the success of HTS has given an in to Turkey into Syria. Now, say what you want about Turkey and Erdogan and his inability or even refusal to do anything about Gaza. He's no Zionist. In fact, I would say he's possibly the biggest regional rival to the Israelis in the region. So, I mean, is it really the case that it's such a bad thing, or is it really the case that it's such a positive development for the Israelis?
He is a Zionist. I mean, Turkey has its own interests.
Of course, it's got its own regional interest, which I'm not saying that.
But they also have economic ties to Israel.
Of course, they have economic. That's what I mean in terms of refusal to do anything, right? But the Erdogan has his own vision for the region, right? And that vision is in opposition to the Israeli vision.
Not necessarily.
It seems to be that way. At least
Certainly not at the moment.
Well, I'm kind of separating the actions as opposed to the vision. Like, for example, let's take the PA, for example, the Palestinian Authority. They're corrupt. They are greedy. I would say they're traitors. They're not Zionists, right? That's a reason why, even though they do the work of Israel in the occupied West Bank, they're still kept at arm's length, because as soon as the opportunity arises for the PA to flip, right, and for them to see it's in their benefit to flip against the Israelis, they'll do so. I mean, that's what the Israelis expect, and that's what anyone would expect, because at the end of the day, they're still Palestinian, right? They're still part of the fabric of the region, and whilst they are greedy and they're traitors, in my opinion, and they are corrupt, they're not Zionists, right? And similarly, Erdogan, whilst he does have ties to the Israelis, he might justify this saying he's part of NATO, etc., whatever. NATO obviously came long ago. Turkey joined NATO long before Erdogan, but that doesn't tell the whole story, right? Erdogan still has a vision that is different to the Israeli vision, because the Israeli vision is complete destruction of the region, right? It's completely taken over the region. Their vision is greater Israel, and now I highly doubt that Erdogan wants to be part of that vision.
Yeah.
And
I don't disagree with any of that.
I highly doubt that the Syrians, Ahmed al-Shara, would like to be part of that vision either.
Well, I mean, look, yes, the Palestinian Authority. So, like, your average sort of PA soldier, security officer, whatever they call themselves. Yeah, they're Palestinians, of course. There is that fundamental difference, They are not. They're not Zionists ideologically. I mean, it's interesting because, like, I'm reminded of Keir Starmer. I don't really think Keir Starmer is. It's an interesting question with these Western politicians to, like, what extent are they bought out, and to what extent do they believe what they're saying and what they're doing? I don't know. But the reality is that, like, the PA is, and it's not just that they're corrupted, although they are corrupt. They are just, like, petty. They're and the successor, the likely successor to Mahmoud Abbas, the PA president, is particularly corrupt, Hussein al-Sheikh. But it's not that it was like the PA was pure in the first place. It never was. Like, and like Yasser Arafat was not, like, he himself was not corrupt. But the point is the material relations. That's the point, is what are they actually doing, And what they're actually doing is stopping Palestinian resistance. is fighting Palestinian resistance, and that's what the PA does. Like it stops especially armed Palestinian resistance, but any kind of Palestinian resistance. It stops journalists and it kills critics. You know, like Nizar Binat, who they beat to death. And so, they that's the reality of what the Palestinian Authority does, and that's what it was set up to do in the first place. Was to become a kind of adjunct to the Palestinian Authority, to the Israeli occupation. And so the question of whether like the individuals involved in that are like personally inside themselves convicted of Zionism as a project is not as important as the reality of what they're actually doing. But you raise a valid point. Could the Palestinian Authority turn against its masters? And it's always a possibility. Like we saw aspects of that happening during the Second Intifada. When you had people like Marwan Barghouti, who gathered up a lot of the weapons of Palestinian Authority forces and basically handed them over to resistance groups to fight Israeli occupation, which they did do. But ultimately, the Palestinian Authority as an entity came down on the side of the Israelis, and that's because of the material relations. And I'm sure the Israelis are trying to figure out every possibility in Syria as well.
In terms of the situation in Syria, and you said they oppose resistance, but some would say that the situation is so precarious that they don't really have a choice. Like the new administration inherited a fractured narco state, and they, at any point, whether it's from the Israelis or the Americans or the UAE, they are at risk of plunging the country back into civil war, or they can make certain concessions, which some would say are going too far, but they would justify it as they don't have a choice in order for them to get the country back on its feet.
But what country is going to be left at the end of it? I mean, the concessions at the moment appear to be including the Golan Heights. Because what is being debated, it seems, with the new regime in Syria, is the new territories that the Israelis have occupied, and Golan is just completely off the table.
I mean, they said they wanted to go back to the agreement that the Assad regime signed previously, right? I think it was the 1970 something. I forgot what it was. The kind of long-term ceasefire situation they had with the Golan Heights, mm-hmm. which the Assad regime had already kind of signed to, right?
Well, as I understand it, that they wanted. They were in negotiations to get the Golan back.
Mm. Well, didn't that involve recognizing Israel?
That was what the Israelis and the Americans were pressing for.
Mm. Which is the same kind of what we see now, is the Americans and the Israelis pressing for something, and then them attributing things being said to the administration, and the administration staying quiet for whatever reason. I'm guessing they want to give kind of the impression that they are flexible in order to get the sanctions lifted.
Yeah, well, we'll see what comes out of it, I guess.
Do you think that, when discussing Syria and its role in the region, for people that either support the Axis or support resistance in general, do you think part of that analysis should involve the opinions of Syrians? Like, for example, even though it's been tumultuous and it's not been smooth sailing since the administration took control, there have been some issues, to put it lightly, major issues in some areas. But the sentiment from the vast majority of Syrians seems to be an optimistic, positive sentiment about the developments. Should that be taken into account when analysing the developments in Syria?
Yeah, of course.
I recently came across a lot of kind of new criticisms towards the administration, which are less about what the administration is doing and seem more to be Islamophobic in nature. A lot of these criticisms are a mockery of certain normative Islamic practices that have now become more open since the new administration has taken holds, like people growing out their beards. I think I recently saw a photo of someone mocking the fact that the tourism police all have beards, right, for example, or the fact that women wearing niqabs are walking around in the streets. Or recently, there was actually a video posted from an account, I think it's called the Alawite League. They posted a video of chants of Allahu Akbar, which is a normal chant in the Islamic world, and overlaid it with a video of monkeys. So there seems to be a kind of an Islamophobic flavor, let's say, to a lot of the sentiment towards the new administration. Why do you think that is?
I mean, sometimes when people are criticizing Israel, not that I'm saying they're like Israel, but sometimes when people are criticizing Israel, they'll go too far and they will be anti-Jewish. So these things can spill over sometimes, you know. It's not an excuse, but it's a reality. Mm.
You warned of an Iraq scenario reoccurring in Syria, but seemingly Iraq has kind of fallen firmly in the hands of the Iranians today. So,
in what sense?
In the sense that the Ba'athists are out of the picture. The majority Shia population, who are or the representatives of the majority Shia population, are in control of the Iraqi government, and many of them are close to the Iranians, right?
Well, they're close to the Iranians in what sense?
I mean, the corridor that goes from Iran to Lebanon goes through Iraq, not just Syria.
Yeah, of course.
So the Iranians have a certain amount of sway, and a lot of resistance groups in Iraq have, I'm not going to say autonomy, but certain free reign to launch a certain amount of rockets towards Israel. So it seems as though Iraq, is in a situation that's maybe a bit more favorable to the Axis.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So what are you warning of when you're warning of an Iraq situation or the ramifications as such?
When did I say that?
I think I read it on Twitter somewhere.
Yeah, it sounds like me, but it sounds like something I would have said quite a while ago.
Would you say that's not the case right now? You don't see it as the case?
In Syria, look, I'm not an expert on Syria.
Okay.
But I think it's maybe I did say that recently. I can't remember. I mean, look, I still think it's a possibility, but it's not something like. Let's all hope that it doesn't come to that, for sure. Yeah.
I'd like to return to the Western media and their recent kind of awakening, if you will. We saw a wave of condemnations recently over the last 2 weeks, and even from Western governments. Even though I think recently Britain and I think it was France, they said they would no longer be recognised in Palestine. I don't know exactly what happened there or what the developments are. But what are your thoughts on this so-called awakening of the Western media?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's very cynical, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that we're seeing a lot of people facing up to the reality that, you mentioned earlier that Chris Hedges article, making the calculation that this could be the end phase of the genocide and things could be coming to an end from the Israeli point of view. I think there's a lot of people now amongst the mainstream media and amongst the political class in Europe who are viewing it in the same way, and so they know that there's going to be accountability for them to an extent, at least in terms of popular opinion. So, it's kind of like the rats leaving the sinking ship. Israel's reputation is never coming back. And so there's a lot of people who want to be able to say, well, I was against that all along, kind of thing. And so there is a lot of kind of cynical face saving. I don't think we're quite to this state yet, but it's impossible now, for example, or very, very difficult anyway. It's very, very difficult now to find to find a white South African who admits to have been supporting apartheid. You'll find one or two, maybe in a Louis Theroux documentary or something, right? But any given white South African that you talk to will say, oh yeah, I was against it all along. And some of them are telling the truth, obviously, like Andrew Feinstein and people like that. But the polling right up to the end of apartheid in South Africa showed that, I don't know, what was it, 80, 90% of white South Afrikaners were in favour of apartheid and didn't want the ANC, didn't want the majority to rule. And so I think it's a very, very similar scenario now in terms of, when, not even in terms of when Zionism ends and when the state of Israel is dismantled and all, and there's actual liberation of Palestine, but even just in terms of this phase, when the genocide is brought to an end, just this phase, what will you be able to find anyone who is in favour of it? I think it'd be hard for people to admit that, and so people are trying to already, even before it's ended, trying to kind of launder their reputations before that happens, because there will be consequences. There'll be political consequences. We already see some of that in the United States with Trump. I think that's really, Gaza is the main reason, certainly one of the leading reasons why Kamala Harris lost, I would say.
Some would say that in addition to attempting to save face, the Western governments may be also attempting to hold together the imploding rules-based world order.
Yeah.
Do you think that they can do that, or do you think it might be too late?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. It might be too late. Things are kind of falling apart. Peter Oborne, brilliant journalist, he just came out with this scoop this week about the fact that David Cameron basically threatened Karim Khan, if over the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. So it seems like, that's the revelation that he made that threat. But the arrest warrants did happen, and they went ahead. And it seems like these organizations like the ICC are kind of falling apart because they went ahead with these arrest warrants, and so there should be these prosecutions, and yet it's all kind of in limbo because there's this there's various allegations against Karim Khan, and so it does seem like there's a a way in which these institutions are threatened. Their very existence is threatened, and it's all of these, especially the European government, also America, because America was never part of the ICC anyway, but we've also got the ICJ and these kind of institutions of international law. The genocide has really, you're right, like it's really exposed these institutions as hollow, and I think they had to do those kind of they had to issue the arrest warrants, for example. They had to do something, otherwise what are they for? They might as well just pack up and go home. And so they had to do something, but nonetheless it does seem like they might be falling apart anyway. So I don't know, we'll have to see if anything concrete comes out of it. You're right. I mean, I think the European politicians especially are probably trying to salvage these institutions, because these institutions have by and large been protected of them anyway. We see how Karim Khan, for example, dropped any kind of prosecutions of Britain, over war crimes in Afghanistan and so forth. So, yeah.
As part of the condemnations, the wave of condemnations that came from the West, David Lammy issued relatively strong words, for David Lammy at least. I think he walked some of them back later, but the Labour Party still continues to send crucial parts for the F-35s to go to Israel. They still haven't enacted a complete arms embargo. What do you think needs to happen in this country for the British government to actually take a solid stance and do its part to end the genocide?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the British government needs to... It's not going to happen right now, but they need to break all ties. They need to, they need to end all the weapons sales. They need to end the political and military support for Israel in all kinds of ways. You see lots of Labour politicians at the moment saying things like that they, it's just a small amount of weapons, and most of the weapons that come from Britain, and most of the weapons come from the United States, and so forth. But that's such a distraction. That's such a red herring. It's not the point. It would make such a massive impact for Britain to end those military ties with Israel completely, because it would set a precedent. It would definitely be a massive domino. Then it would be hard for countries like we've already seen Spain and Ireland breaking certain ties. It would be so hard for countries like France, for example, to not break its ties, military sales to Israel and so forth. And so it would be it would have a massive impact, and that would put pressure on other countries like Germany and even America. And it would make things harder for them to continue with the way they were going. So it would have a massive effect for them to do that. And there's so much that the British government could do to put pressure on Israel in that way, but isn't doing it because they're ultimately supportive of Israel. Like Keir Starmer infamously said, he's a Zionist without qualification. Is he saying that because he's bought off or because he believes it? Who knows?
Like I said, I don't think he believes in anything.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think could be taken as steps by the British public in order to pressure the UK government to do what it needs to do?
I think that something that's been lacking in the protests is support for direct action. Of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign specifically. There is Palestine Action, which is for 5 years now has been carrying out direct action against Elbit Systems, the drone maker, which has got, I believe, 8 or 9 facilities left in the UK. And they've managed to shut down 2 Elbit premises in the UK. There was previously 10, I believe. So they've had a massive impact in a short amount of time, and yet the Palestine Solidarity Movement specifically has not only not supported that, but has actually acted against it behind the scenes. They've tried to stop Palestine action really from existing. And now, obviously, look, direct action is not for everybody. You're risking arrest. You know, there's a sense in which it could potentially even be physically dangerous. You know, now everyone involved in Palestine action has got things to lose. They've got careers to lose. They've got you know, they've got families and so on and so forth. But still, you know, direct action is not for everyone. But the campaign can be supported in different ways. You know, whether it's media work or just a solidarity demonstration. You know, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign has done a great job of mobilizing mass demonstrations. That's great. You know, it's great to go to a demonstration and so on. But I think especially after 20 months of genocide and doing the same thing, I think we have to look at ways in which we're not doing certain things. Are we really having the impact we could be having? Like, for example, like if the PSC and the other groups that have been organising these demonstrations, if they're mobilising hundreds of thousands of people, could they not just mobilise 2,000 people to go to a protest outside an Elbit factory, for example? Why not try that? Do you know what I mean? So I think there's definitely more the movement could be doing.
On a final note, what would your parting message on this particular podcast be to the people of Gaza?
Wow, that's a very deep question. I'm sorry. Sorry, we haven't stopped this. I don't know. I don't feel I've got a right to talk to the people of Gaza, to be honest with you. It's, yeah.
Well, Asa, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the hard work you do. On this bleak note, we'll have to end, but we, regardless of how ineffective we've been, I think we still understand that we have lots to do and we'll keep doing it. And I'm sure with yourself, you'll continue working as hard as you can.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Carry on. We'll keep doing what we do. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.